Welcome back to the Manage to Win podcast. I'm talking with Chuck Wisner today. He wrote a book called The Art of Conscious Conversations. Now, how many of us communicate with others on autopilot? So he has 4 universal types of communications. He walks us through them and helps us be more aware of what type of conversation is this, because they kind of interweave with one another. We have very candid conversation here on the podcast, so you can learn. And you can apply what you learn to be better in conversations and build meaningful connections with other people and get more stuff done. Let's dive in. Chuck, welcome to the show. You are a communications expert, which I'm excited to talk about because I always need work on my communication. But through your stuff, are you talking more about consciousness or communication?
Well, they sort of go hand in hand, The less conscious we are, the less productive our conversations will probably be, So they work together.
Yeah. So where do you start when you're advising people or studying them? Do you kind of figure out, are they consciously incompetent, or is this a communication issue? I just got to deal with habits.
Yeah. Generally, when I'm working with people, we start by a little history and and I also ask them, so as a leader or even as a parent or whatever, how you communicate. Do you have certain patterns? Do you have certain ways you get triggered? So I try to get a little background of, I get triggered when my boss says this in a meeting, and then I can sort of navigate that and deconstruct that. So it's sort of like, I ask them questions so I can hear what their style is and what their patterns are. And then I can sort of unravel their story a bit and help them find a way out or into another better story.
And do you do most of your work with people speaking in front of a group, or do you do a lot of your work with people who are doing one-on-one conversations or one to a small group?
Who am I? Who's my audience?
Yeah, I mean, who do you mainly work with? Are you working with people jumping on a stage, or is it more the day-to-day that you're working with?
I mean, the most experience I have is with executives at Fortune 200 companies and their teams. So one-on-one, it's very private, personal, confidential. And then with teams, we say, okay, what happens when teams get together, and what are those communication patterns? Because that's where they go haywire.
So can you give me an example of a team that had some difficulty? Mm-hmm. And what was that like? Because I don't know how big the team is, but I would assume it's not just one issue, but you get different issues per person. Yeah.
So one example is I worked with a company, I'll keep the name of the company confidential, but their finance team and their legal team, probably in the range of 10 people each, were just for like months just at each other. There was high stakes issues around strategy and around finances and legal issues. And they were just at each other to the point where they wouldn't even talk to each other. And so we went to an offsite for 3 days. It was in Texas. A beautiful place. We got to shoot guns and ride boats and do all those and eat together and smoke cigars together. But in between all those activities where they're sort of like, connecting socially to see that nobody has two heads, nobody's a monster. I got them to just, really open up and say, what are the assumptions you're making about the finance team? What are the assumptions you're making about the legal team? And when I do that, I write them all on a flip chart or a whiteboard, and then we stand back and look at them and they go, well, holy shit. We really had a lot of negative judgments, And then from there, we start unwinding what I call deconstructing their story to see what's under their story, what's under their triggers and their emotions that are driving their dysfunction.
So when you do those lists, do you do those with both groups in the room, or with one group out of the room and you work with one and create their list, and then you meet with the other group and create the list, and then you bring them together and share the list? Because otherwise one group may be like, you gotta be kidding me. They might be interrupting, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, well, that what the methodology you're mentioning is very much a mediation methodology, where you have two parties sparring, and you privately meet with one, hear their story, you privately meet with the other and hear their story, and then you start building bridges. With these groups, I think it depends on how much tension there is. With this particular group, I actually did it with everybody in the room, right? But I had them break up first to talk amongst themselves to say, okay, what stories are we carrying? What do we feel safe saying? So I gave them some instructions, and they did a little group work so that when they came back, they had a new story, or at least they knew what they wanted to tell or say, what they felt safe telling or saying, and that way, the opposite team gets to hear them speak and hear them say, we really have a concern about how you were redlining this legal document because it holds our hands, ties our hands behind our back, and we can't do our job. So those kind of things, and then we unwind all of that and find ways to build bridges.
So, like in this situation, there were certain things that came out initially by each group, and were there additional things that came out as you started to discuss them that brought up, oh yeah, and we forgot to bring up this key point too, or this gets worse when this happens?
Yeah, that sort of unfolds as it's important that me or whoever's working with them, in this case, me, creates a safety, psychological safety. So that I'm the person, they're addressing me, right? And when we have them talking to each other, there's definitely, what happens is in the unwinding, their story changes. They say, oh, we thought you guys were doing this because you wanted to make us look bad, or you wanted to win whatever, the boss's favor. But in fact, this is what's happening. So, that way when I inquire and keep saying, well, tell me more about that. What's under your judgment? How are you thinking? And then they start spilling the beans and their story changes.
How often are these judgments being triggered by fears? And if so, what types of fears are typically behind these?
Yeah. Well, most of our judgments, negative judgments that we have, are at some level fear triggered.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I use a funnel drawing or picture to visualize a funnel that if you ever put a quarter in a museum of science and it spins around the funnel, and by the time it gets to the bottom, it's so fast that you can't even recognize it as a quarter, right? And so I use that to say, when something happens and we get triggered, our beliefs and our mental models and our judgments get us spinning, and we can't see clearly at all. We're just in a fall, right? And so this notion of deconstructing the stories says, wait a minute, when you get triggered, you don't have to go down there, because down there is some level of fear. I mean, it might be a light fear, they don't like me. It might be a heavy fear, like I'm going to get fired, right? But if we or hurt, or in some way, or abused, or my boundaries broken, lots of stories. So the idea is to get people, to catch themselves spinning. And then when they catch themselves spinning, the art of asking questions and saying, well, what's this about? What's really under your emotion? What's really going on? Helps them spin up instead of spinning down.
Yeah. How do you get them to stop spinning? Because once that quarter, to stay with your analogy, once that quarter starts going, I find that people have a real tough time grabbing the quarter.
And say, let's move it. Let's not spin anymore. Yeah, it depends on the pain point. I mean, in this particular example with finance and legal, they all knew that they were in trouble. I mean, they didn't ask me to come to this offsite. The CEO asked me to come to this offsite, right? So they knew they're in trouble. So at least they know that they have to do some work, right? And the bottom line is, get people to unspin, they have to want to stop spinning. They have to say, you know what? I'm tired of this. I'm tired of getting triggered and losing my temper in a meeting, or I'm tired of getting triggered and becoming a wallflower and not saying anything right? They have to want to say, you know what? How do I manage this? And once they get that, then we say, all right, so you have to start tracking your trigger and you have to start documenting what the hell the triggers are. Is it because the boss behaves this way? Is it because your colleagues treat you that way? What's that trigger? And let's deconstruct that a little bit. And so what we're doing is helping them sort of not attach to it, but witness their story and their trigger. So they have a little bit of a detachment. And from there, they have some, their ego isn't so involved and they can be a little more aware and conscious and then say, okay, what can I do differently?
And do each of them have to attach that desire to change to something that's a higher purpose or that's a value, or that's something that they want? Maybe it's not a higher purpose, but maybe it's like you brought up, if I don't change this, I'm going to get fired. Or if maybe it's something else that I need to do this. Does that typically happen? I mean, there has to be a motivation, doesn't there?
Sure. And there's multiple ways that can happen. One could be around vision, strategy. The other could be around culture. And this is often where I go because it's not where people can go by themselves or think of going. Meaning to say, okay, guys, this has been going on for 6 months. It's not very productive. Let's just talk about what would be a good relationship for you guys to have as as teams that have to work together, collaborate together. Let's define the kind of team collaborators you want to be. And then they get the name, well, we want to be truthful with one another. We want to speak our minds, but we also want to collaborate and find mutual solutions that are mutually beneficial and beneficial for the company. So if we can establish some goals like that, some desires like that are shared, right? Then we can lean into that and say, okay, to get there, what do you need to do? What behaviors and what actions can you take tomorrow that are different than what you've been doing for the past 4 or 6 months?
And do you ever ask them if these behaviors that they're demonstrating in the work environment are also negatively affecting them in their personal lives? I mean, without prying, but do you ever relate it there to kind of say that if you're behaving this way here, are any of you seeing it show up elsewhere and that causing some issues, which you don't have to be candid about, but I don't know how you handle it, but.
Sure. No, and that generally in these sessions, there's usually a handful of leaders that want to do personal work, that want to have an advice. I think of myself as a leadership advisor or communication advisor. They want to do the personal work. And those kind of issues will come up in one-on-one work.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Where if I could name like another example, a client, we'll call him Jay. He was very passionate about his work. It was an energy company. It was a new dimension to energy that he was in charge of. He's incredibly passionate. And he was a good guy and he was a really smart guy. But he would get his team together and his passion would be he would stand up and on the flip chart of the whiteboard, actually, he'd think, look at this is our challenge. Here's what we can do. And blah, blah, blah. And red in the face and really drawing circles and drawing pictures. And they say to the team, what do you think? And crickets. Because he already told them what he wanted,
Yeah.
They said, I'm not going to disagree with him. He's too damn hot,
Yeah.
So with him, it would be like, are you like this? For him, it was like, letting him know he was unaware of the impact he was having on his team.
Yeah.
That his behavior, his pattern. I like to call these things patterns because it's less judgmental than habit. We all have patterns that we didn't even choose. We adopt them as we're growing up, through our family, our culture, and our work history and our experience. So he had a pattern of doing this, but he didn't know the consequence of the pattern. And as soon as he saw that, he goes, hell no, that's not what I want. And they say, okay, so let's change how you work with your team. Let's say, you can say we have a challenge and then sit your butt down and say, I want to hear from each of you. What do you think about this?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a flip. That was actually a pretty easy flip not everybody does that or is that aware. I mean, I have plenty of people who say, no, I don't want to go there. They say, fine, then I'm not going to work with you because they don't want to do the work.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, it seems like when you have an addict, they have to hit a certain place where they want to change.
That's right. That's right.
And yeah. So that makes sense. And then, you probably cannot mention that I don't know whether you do, but whether it comes up that a lot of these patterns come from some type of emotional wounds. Correct me if you disagree or I'm wrong. Mm-hmm. But if you do believe that, I'm curious whether that comes up, whether people want to talk about it in front of a group at all. But I'm also curious about whether it's talked about or not as you're working with people, because you've got so many years of experience doing this. You can kind of spot things. Mm-hmm. You're like, oh, yeah, that person's got a wound. And that's, it's this wound or it's that wound, but that's causing X.
Yeah. That sort of dives into the idea, emotional intelligence, right?
Yeah.
And in my experience, I think the more emotionally intelligent we get, we do our work, right? Yeah. And we raise our emotional intelligence. I like to think of like, I'm growing little antennas. The more emotionally intelligent I get, I have bigger antennas. And so I can read, the more we know what that is, the more we can read it from other people. Because our bodies don't lie. Somebody can be telling a fib and a lie, but they're nervous or they're fidgety, their eyes are twitching or blinking or whatever. Our bodies don't lie. So we learn to read those signals, right? Yeah. And I do a lot of work with people around private conversations, the monkeys in the mind that get us in trouble constantly.
Yeah, I had one guy call them the negativity committee. I was saying, I have that negative voice. He goes, no, for me, it's a committee. It's not one.
That's right. It's a bunch of voices.
Number of demons, voices, or whatever you want to call. So yeah, that's interesting. And so do you find that when people's EQ increases, mm-hmm. that they're able to not only better control their triggers, but they're also able to give people some grace?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the more we have our EQ, and it's aligned with how we're showing up in the world. It's like as we move up the funnel, instead of fear, there's more empathy, more compassion, even more love. At the top of the funnel is just wide open acceptance, love, compassion, understanding, all those things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that comes along with emotional intelligence. Also emotional intelligence, you have to be humble enough and vulnerable enough to say, God, I've been there, I've done that, I screwed that up. I used to behave that way. I used to get angry in a meeting and throw things.
So what do you do with people who are stuck in the opposite end, that they're so consumed by fear, mm-hmm. that they've got a victim mentality, an entitlement mentality, and you're in this meeting with a group and you identify one or more are just, these people are not going to change.
Right.
Or what do you do there?
Well, it's a good question. I think that would depend on the group dynamics.
Yeah.
Like, if I have a group moving in a good direction and they're saying, yeah, let's change how we do this. Let's, sometimes they just do an exercise through the briefs. Like, okay, what do your current relationships feel like? And I have them go off and draw a picture, and it's like, wow. And so what would you like it to feel like? And it's like, then they draw pictures and people are connected with lines and they're talking, it's a nice circle. What do we need to do to get there, And if I have a group moving in that direction and I have one or two naysayers, and there are people out there that say, this is all BS, this is all soft stuff. It's really the hard stuff. So if the group is moving well, I'll just sideline that person, not publicly, but I'll just sort of let them do their thing and let the group sort of like, if they break up into smaller groups of 4 or 5 people, I'll let the group sort of like deal with it. And if they can't, they'll come to me and then I can take the person aside and say, you have a really negative impact on this meeting. I have two things. If you can't, if you don't buy into what they're doing and it's the group doing it, it's not me doing it, you can either be silent, you can leave, or you can change your tune.
Yeah.
and give them.
So in other words, you as the facilitator, leader, advisor, your term, you are going to have a fair amount of freedom, but you're also going to have some firm boundaries. You cross this boundary and you either choose to play, you choose to be silent, or you choose to leave.
Yeah. And the boundaries could be simple as I'm in front of a room of 20 people, or we're working with these two teams, and there's some gibberish going on, and I'll just stop and say, guys, do you want to be part of this meeting, or do you want to have your own meeting?
Yeah. And now, Chuck, I want you to be candid. You've been doing this a long time. Yeah, I've learned most of my lessons through making mistakes. Did you learn this boundary thing by getting what you tolerated in some meeting someday, decades ago, or whatever it was, where you allowed that little chit chat, or you allowed somebody? Did you have to learn it the hard way? And if so, without naming names, obviously, do you want to share a story on that? Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you just read it and you got it. I'm not that smart.
Yeah, no, surely no. When I changed careers, I was an architect for 20 years in Boston, and then I changed careers at a young age of 40 because I fell in love with this work. I left architecture, and I was a partner in a firm, and is a reason behind why I left. I mean, there's a reason that it went sour, but I really fell in love with this new work. I jumped ship. I had 2 young kids. I had one client a week in my back pocket that was paying me $100 a week. This was a while back. And, we were scared. My wife and I were scared, but I was really I really wanted to do this. I was really passionate about it. And lo and behold, the old saying, you close one door, another door's open. When I closed that door, it was about a month later that I was invited to be a coach on a really interesting, big deal MIT leadership training. It was through this Society for Organizational Learning at MIT. Yeah. And a couple of my teachers from the ontology of language invited me to be a coach. And so I was pretty green, but I was working with these 30-member teams, 30-member groups of executives that were coming from all over the country from 7 different companies to teach them communication and emotional intelligence and meditation and all these things. So back then I made mistakes. And I saw there was Leslie Pollitt was a colleague, and Fred Kaufman was the head of this. I learned lessons from him, and I would stand up and do something, and there'd be going on. And I'd say, what do I do about this? And Fred said, you just shut him down, bud. Shut him down.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that's one of the biggest struggles a lot of leaders have, is not how to say there's boundaries, but how to enforce the boundaries in a nice, empathetic, but extremely firm way. I call it good cop, bad cop leadership, or it's good cop leadership, where it's like, hey, you need to do what I'm saying, or else my partner over here, which is the rules, the law, or the client's going to upset. It's usually not a person, the bad cop, or my partner over here is going to break your kneecaps. So we, but that's the only way you can stay on track. Well, let me shift gears a little bit. You are a communication expert, conversation expert. I love what you're saying, doing. You mentioned that there's 4 universal types of conversations.
Yep.
I don't think anybody goes into a conversation and thinks, okay, now which type of conversation am I going to have here? Is it going to be number 1, number 3? No. So you want to walk us through those and how that can help people maybe to be more aware of them?
Yeah, sure. Then I had a client about 15 years ago that he was he was a client on for 5 years or so. And I was meeting him for cocktails one night, and he said, I love all this work we're doing. And it's like mental models and meditation and emotional intelligence and all these linguistic things, but I don't know how to connect the dots. And that really stuck with me. And so, I just was noodling on that for quite a while. And then one day I live in a beach town. I was walking on the beach and it dawned on me, something that I learned when I was studying language was these types of conversations. And so what the 4 conversations do, we're in them all the time, and they interweave, and they're part of meetings. But when we take them apart, we see that each type of conversation has different tools and different benefits that we can learn from that will change our patterns of communicating. So storytelling is great. I mean, we love it. Human beings, cultures, societies thrive on stories. Money is a story. Legal stuff is a story, and so we thrive on stories. However, there's a dark side. We all have stories from a personal point of view. We all have stories that serve us, and we have stories that harm us. And the ones that harm us are usually the ones that are those negative judgment in committees, right? Because this guy's full of crap, and they shouldn't be doing it this way. They'll never work it out. We have all that going on. That's our personal stories that we haven't processed. So there's a way of processing our stories so that we turn them into to be productive, to change our conversations for the better.
Now, is that why you say your stories are not the truth?
Yes.
Okay. So basically you're saying some of your stories are not the truth. Or
parts of your story. Parts of our stories are not the truth.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because stories are only made of... Well, stories are made of three things: emotions, facts, and opinions. Emotions, we need to learn that under every emotion there's a story, there's a thinking. Facts are facts, and that's gotten messy in the last 10 years. But from a social, cultural, political point of view, we should be able to agree on, this is my iPhone. My table is white. There's just facts that we shouldn't be able to disagree on. And then where it really gets messy is opinions, because then our egos get attached to our opinion, and then we speak our opinion like it's the truth, right? And so we come into a meeting. This is how we should be doing, with a closed fist, because we're speaking our opinion as it's the answer and is the truth. And so that's the deconstruction of our stories and how it happens. Now, when you go ahead.
It's interesting because it strikes me, because there's a guy named Greg Kokel who does evangelism, and he has two questions that are not evangelistic. They're not. All he wants to do is plant seeds. So when somebody says something or does something, and it's like you're saying, it's an opinion, and he wants to be respectful. So he calls them the Columbo questions from the old TV show. He says, "So what do you mean by that? Or what does that mean?"
Yeah.
And then he'll explain it, and he'll say, "Tell me more," and he'll listen. He's very sincere. And then he just says, "Why do you believe that's true?" And that's all he says. He doesn't try to change their mind or anything. And I laughed. I don't know whether the audience caught it when you talked about how facts are more difficult in recent years.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of this whole digital age, where we are in an environment now where more and more people, knowingly or unknowingly, are manipulating partial truths into some conclusion that's often tilted or twisted based on how they've been wounded.
Or what sticks for them, what gives them a high, a little bit of dopamine. And there's a connection between like going down the rabbit hole, right, of conspiracy theories and addiction, because it's like the same kind of dopamine hit you get in your brain. Yeah, so there's an interesting link there. So storytelling is the primary conversation about ourselves. It's very personal, very private. That's where we do our own work. Now, the more you do your work and I do my work, and then we come together to solve a problem or to create something new.
Yeah.
When we do our work and we don't enter the conversation with a fist, but we enter with an open hand. Like I have I don't want to take anyone's position away, but I say, okay, I don't take your position, but open your hand and tell me why you think that way.
Yeah.
And I have four tricks: desires, concerns, power issues, and standards. And you can deconstruct any of your hard-held positions that way. You can open your hand and say, here's my concerns. Here's the values I have that's making me make this judgment. Here are my desires. And power issues is always like every conversation there's power issues, whether it's with your kid, your wife, your boss, your colleague. And you have to be aware of that, right? Because that makes it different than how you approach the conversation. So that's how we can deconstruct our own stuff, but that's also how we can come together. And instead of having arguments, a conversation like this, we can have conversations with our open hands and find solutions.
So do you have a common example that you give of deconstructing something in those four ways, whether you're explaining your opinion or whether you're asking someone to, kind of deconstruct or walk you through how they came to a certain conclusion?
Yeah, usually the good stories we have aren't a problem because, we show up and we're honest and it's working and we don't, we just have to do our thing. It's like cocktail parties, right? We're not trying to accomplish much. We're getting to know each other.
Yeah.
But the negative ones are the ones that cause trouble, right? And so I might ask, so what is your pattern that has you have an emotional reaction, whether it's anger or sadness or disappointment? And then let's talk about that emotion. And then the work is,
but Chuck, I'm interrupting you because I'm going to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
Can you give me an actual conversation that you had example? I mean, certainly we've had some political campaigns over the past year. Politics is probably an easy one to use an example. I don't care if you do, but maybe you've got a leadership one or you've got a team member one, but where somebody can actually say, oh, that's what he means by telling me, here's how the conversation flowed.
Yeah, so I'll give you a very personal example of how I screwed up in the last 6 months. After practicing for 25 years. We're all humans. We're going to mess up, I talk about this work. It's deep work and it's a lifelong practice. It's not, nobody's perfect, even our biggest gurus fail ultimately.
A journey, not a destination.
Yeah, exactly. So recently I'm building a new garage on my property, detached from the house, quite a bit detached at the other end of the property. And I have neighbors who were good neighbors of mine, friends, younger than me, but friends, young kids. And we needed to have a little bit of a right-of-way to bring a 2-inch septic line through this sort of 10-foot triangle where their property butts into where we needed to go. And so we asked if they would give us that easement and said, I'll have my lawyers draw it up, etc. Underground, we can't build there, they can't build there. And there was another thing I offered to change this triangle piece of land for their driveway is on my land. So I said, okay, I'll take this triangle, you can have your driveway.
Yeah.
So we were close to coming to a deal, but they were stalling. I said, well, let's go outside and just talk about this, right? And so we went outside. It took me a couple of weeks to get them to come out, because they were acting shy about it. And I said, so, here's the benefit to you. Here's the benefit to me. You can't build her. I can't build her. You get your driveway back. And I don't know what's going on in their life. I didn't know what's going on in their life, but they said, no, we're not doing either. We're not giving you the easement and we don't want to do the land swap. And I said, well, why? What is there a reason? They said, we're protecting our investment. I said, well, what does that mean? We're protecting our investment. That's all they would say.
Yeah.
And I lost it. And I said, well, that's really crappy. And so I'm telling the story because I had to deconstruct what happened to me.
Yeah.
And so here's how I deconstruct. Okay. Desire. I wanted to find a solution that was beneficial to both parties. That felt fair to me. That's the kind of neighbor I want to be. I thought we were on that path. Obviously, that got void. Avoided.
Yeah.
Power issues, we're equal neighbors. I was making them an offer to give them their driveway back, so it's their land. No power issues except we're neighbors and we should be treat each other respectfully. The third one is my concerns. So I had a concern that if they didn't give me the right of way or they didn't swap the land, it meant a lot of money for me because I had to reroute the septic line into a hill where there's rock and do a lot of excavation. So that was my concern, dollar signs. But mostly the last one is standards. And what I came to realize was I have a very high standard of what it means to be a good neighbor, right? You help them, you're friendly, you help them out if they need to, you don't put up unnecessary fences, or, you're just a good neighbor. That was and when they said they just won't do any of this because they wanted to protect their property, it just struck a chord with me. Like, that's not what a neighbor does. And that's why I said, that's really crappy.
Well, on the surface too, I mean, that statement, it gives no detail. It gives no facts.
Right.
It's just a block.
No reason.
Exactly. There's no explanation. There's no, hey, I'd really like to help you, but we can't do X. And it's just like, I don't understand. This seems like a no lose, win-win opportunity. I mean, and even though you have a bias that you want to get it done, I mean, I'm not even familiar with the situation. I don't even know what city you live in, but I'm thinking, this is easy. I remember my parents did that with a neighbor. We owned half of her driveway. They came down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then my dad they approached us and said, can we have that land? Can we reconvey it? And my dad, we'll pay you X. And my dad was, yeah, that's fine. And then they ended up taking more than X, which he wasn't too happy about, but it still was like, whatever. And it didn't matter. But still, so how did this thing work out? Did it just end in a stalemate, or did it come back around?
They stuck to their guns, and I said, can you tell me what protecting our investment means? And they said, no, we're just protecting our investment. All right. And so I said, okay, well, I'm really sorry to hear that, because that's not the kind of neighbor I want to be. I can't remember how I finished the conversation, but they weren't happy. She thought I wasn't yelling or anything. I was just saying, that's really crappy. I didn't use that word. I used a different word. Starts with an S and ends with a Y. So they were unhappy. I was frustrated. That night I wrote them a text and said, look, I'm really sorry that sort of went south. I was really surprised by your reasoning for not finding a compromise or finding a solution together. And I'm sorry that I sort of lost it and said what I said, but it was sort of broke my standard of what a good neighbor would be. And I'm really sorry. And they haven't recovered. They won't really talk to us.
Wow. Yeah, some people are that way. So what's your conclusion on that? I mean, I have my own, but once again, I know next to nothing about the situation, but.
Yeah, Mike, I'm sad. I'm actually sad that like I said earlier, every emotion has a story underneath. So sad is you lose something. You lose something you cherish. So I lost a good neighbor. I'm sad because I didn't handle it as well as I could have. I don't think the result would have been any different, but I could have handled it better. So that was my way of taking my emotion and deconstructing it and learning from it and saying, okay. So now I'm totally accepting that, and I gave my apology, and we're trying to be friendly, and we gave them fudge at Christmas, which we do to the kids, but they haven't reciprocated. So,
yeah, I think that's very interesting, and I think it's a great lesson for the audience. Mm-hmm. That, first of all, I'm reading Extreme Ownership right now, the book by the 2 Navy SEALs, which I'm really enjoying. But it's consistent with what you're saying. Have you seen that one?
No, I've heard of it. I haven't seen it. Yeah,
pretty easy to read, but it's where they're talking about you have to own your stuff. So I've said for years, if there's 100% of a problem and your part of the problem is 1%, own the 1%. And then like you've done is that, all you can do is own that 1% and apologize if need be. And then you just have to let it go and respect the other people. But there's something else going on that they don't want to discuss or share. And unfortunately,
it's their business, Yeah.
And
so that there's another lesson here, which is acceptance, And I think a lot of our suffering comes from when we fight reality, I could still be suffering and spinning over this thing, but I think, okay, I've come to accept that there's something going on in their life that they didn't want to play game. They didn't want to play. And I'll accept that. Do I like it? No. But do I want to keep repeating that story and that negativity over and over and over again in my mind, then I'm suffering. Oh, I say, I don't know what's going on. That's what happened. I'm not going to fight reality. I'm moving on.
Yeah, and I think part of your story that I'm hearing too, Chuck, is that you also put the relationship first where there's some hurt. It's just like, hey, we used to be friends as neighbors, and now we're not. And if you had a choice of being friends again or getting your sewer line in, which would you choose?
Well, because of the reason for my garage and my sewer line is pretty big. It's another story about my family and why I'm doing it. I think I would choose a sewer line because I don't think I did anything wrong other than have a minor blow up.
Yeah.
Like telling him that was really crappy. How can you do this to me? That was really crappy. Yeah. So, I might do that conversation differently. I would definitely do that conversation differently.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't give in. I wouldn't give up.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I appreciate your candor. Yeah. And I think that's a great example of the stories that we tell ourselves, and they're constantly flowing, aren't they? And they're
constantly. Yeah.
Constantly.
Yeah. And so the more we do work on our stories and detach from some of our emotional stuff and our ego, the better we can go to the next conversation, which is collaboration. And that really is learning to own your opinion, own your position, reveal your thinking, be a bit vulnerable, right? And humble. And then if we have a great collaborative conversation where we're trying to solve a problem, but you come in saying it should be A and I'm coming in saying it should B, and then we go, well, here's why I think that way, and here's why I think that, and I say, oh gosh, David, I never thought of it that way.
Oh, exactly.
And then all of a sudden we have another idea bubbles up, and that really is where the creative conversation comes in. Because it's our openness to new ideas, our openness to listening, our openness to learning from others. More humility.
Yeah.
Right. And so when we have that creative conversation, there's twofold. One about our intuitions, trusting our intuitions, reacquainting ourselves with our creative right brain instead of being addicted to our left brain, which is the linear, rational thinker. Right.
Yeah.
And so that collaborative and creative conversations are really the most, what's the word I want? They're juicy isn't the right word, but they're like, that's where stuff happens. Where we meaningful and where we can learn from each other and new ideas bubble up,
Yeah.
And then if we do
those
two, and if we do those conversations really well, the last conversation is called the commitment conversation, which is the action conversation. Who's going to do what by when?
Yeah.
And that's where we make promises to each other. And we culturally, in business and out of business, we are addicted to yes, and we tend to make sloppy promises. We tend to make bad commitments to one another without really taking the time to understand what we're saying yes to.
Yeah. It's interesting when I think of the DISC behavioral language, we do assessments of behaviors and driving forces or motivators, and then competencies across 25 different behaviors. It strikes me with each of these four that the way I was taught was, the D and the C on the DISC scale are task-oriented. The I and the S's are people-oriented. And when I think of these four, I'm thinking, the storytelling, there's different ways you can look at it. The commitment piece is definitely a task-oriented behavior.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah. The creative and the collaborative and the other one, you can kind of, depends how they're being lived out, could be either task or people-oriented.
And story is very personal. Story is personal.
Yeah. And stories are, and we are our best salespeople, right? If we're telling ourselves a lie, our story is a lie or an exaggerated truth, but we're repeating it over and over again. We're creating a neural pathway that just locks us into that, aren't we?
That's right. Yeah. And that's the other reason I like to talk to people about when we're doing this work. We are messing around with neurons in your brain. Yeah. And so there's no magical switch like, okay, I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to behave that way again, or I'm never going to say that again tomorrow. Well, if there were a magical switch, I'd be a very rich man because I say, okay, if you don't want to ever do that again, hand me $10,000 and I'll push this little red switch.
Yeah.
But there's no switch because it takes big practice. If you've been developing this pattern for 30 years or 20 years, and now you want to change it, well, give yourself a break. It's going to take you a little time until you do it well.
Hey, I guarantee you. So I'm not a betting man, but I would bet that with these, I forget the name for it, but as they continue to put chips in people's brains, we're going to have flim-flam salespeople can try to convince us that, oh, we can help you overcome that habit. We'll just put this chip in your brain and we'll program you, and you can trust us that that's all we'll be doing. And that we can change that. Yeah, no, once again, I think that's a journey. That's not a destination.
Yeah, exactly. It takes practice, but I have plenty of evidence with myself and with my clients that, something might happen real time and you get triggered, and then 10 minutes later or an hour later, you go, oh God, I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have walked away from that, or whatever we do. That is the moment to pay attention. And then you go, oh, why did I do that? What was I thinking? What was I feeling? Let me deconstruct this a little bit. And then guess what? If you say, okay, you know what? I can do it better. I can do this. I could have done this instead of that. Well, now the same thing happens. The boss triggers you the same way, but instead of 10 minutes, it's 2 minutes, and you're still in the meeting. And you go, oh, let me redo this. And you work this until real time you get better at processing and catching yourself so you aren't making the mistakes you don't want to make.
Oh, yeah.
The other thing I want to mention about the conversations is the way they unfold, and the book unfolds in this way. It's storytelling, collaborative, creative, and commitment. It's interesting how they're bookmarked because we love our stories and we love commitment conversations. We love telling our stories and we love taking action. But because of our love and our patterns of using those two conversations, we skip the middle two. So the middle two, which are the most productive, the most enlightening in a way, right? We skip them. And I call that a conversational bypass. And this happens in meetings all the time. We get in a meeting, everybody comes with their stories, you hear a bunch of stories, and then the boss or the loudest person in the room says, okay, what are we going to do? Boom. And we go for it, right?
Yeah.
But we didn't come up with other ideas. We didn't think of other possibilities. We didn't say, I was wrong, but you made me think that way, David. And then here's other possibilities. We didn't do any of that middle ground stuff. And then sometimes we have to regret our decision because we did a bypass.
It's interesting as you talked about how, it's like not like turning on a light bulb or whatever analogy you used. I was struck because Friday night we went to Snook's Ice Cream in downtown Folsom, and family-run chocolate place and ice cream. And the people are the kids they have there, they train them really well. They're super nice. I gave a really nice tip when I was done, and I didn't do it to be noticed, but maybe I did instinctively. And they said thank you. We've been guilt tripped into tipping on everything nowadays, which is another conversation. But I really liked that they appreciated my generous tip. We went back the next night because my daughter and my grandson were visiting, and we had ice cream again. And this time I didn't feel as much attention, and because they were swamped. And so the gal left quickly. And so I left less of a tip. And then we meandered around a little bit. And I realized as we went into the other room where they have a sitting area, I realized, wow, I went back to my old mistake that I had developed a few years ago when tipping became prevalent.
Right.
I wanted to be noticed for my tip. And that was wrong.
Yeah.
I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that person.
Right.
So I went back and I snuck in a cash tip that was the night before amount. So I actually ended up giving a lot more.
Equivalent. Yeah.
Yeah. Without being seen. I just snuck it into the little tip thing.
Yeah.
And that kind of equaled it out for me. I didn't want anybody to notice it. and I wanted to be the person I wanted to be. And I'm not saying that for any applause. I'm saying it for that, like you said, it's a lifelong struggle. I got to watch out for that.
Sure. Yeah. But what your story is great, because what you did was you tipped smaller, you walked away, but then you said, oh crap, why did I do that tonight and didn't do that yesterday, or why did I do that yesterday and not tonight? So you caught yourself, right? And then you said, wait a minute, I don't want to do it for that. I want to do it for them, not for me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to make their day, because they're as wealthy or as fortunate as I am, and it's not for me. And you went back and you did it. So you did that. I call this the pendulum. Something happens and we're like 2 days later or 2 hours later, we're out here going, oh crap, why did I do that? And slowly we bring that back to real time. You did that in a matter of 5 minutes.
Yeah, or whatever the time frame was. But yeah, and it's interesting. It goes back to what you were talking about emotional intelligence. And it goes back to what we discussed of having some higher objective. Because for me, it was like, that's not the person I want to be. And so what does it look like now to recover from that error and still be the person I want to be? It wasn't that I said, oh yeah, hey, excuse me, helping that person. I want you to notice I didn't give you a big enough tip. I'm making up for it now.
Yeah, right.
Anyway,
so exactly.
So Chuck, you've got this book, The Art of Conscious Conversation. You're doing a lot of other work. If people want to learn more, because obviously you've got a lot of talent, a lot of wisdom you can help people with, how do they get a hold of you? Where do they learn more?
So my website is chuckwisner.com. And I think you just scroll down a teeny bit and you can put in an email address and you get a free PDF of the book introduction. So you can get a taste of the introduction of the book. That's just a way for people to taste it, right? You can write me through my website. Just write me a note. I'm taking on some new clients, individual clients, and I'm very fussy about what teams I work with these days, because I have a handful of lovely teams I work with, and I'm careful about what I take on. But anyway, so the website is there. I am on LinkedIn, not super active, but you can find me there. And I'm on Instagram, again, not super active, but my podcasts, I just had an article published in Fast Company. So when those things happen, I usually post them on LinkedIn or post them on Instagram. But, feel free to write me a note through my website. My email is chuck@chuckwisner.com. It's easy. And yeah, so, I'm doing all of these podcasts and articles just to keep the book alive and get people thinking about it, because I think so many people have benefited. I want to spread the word.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I think you've given a lot of great insights, and I hope people take these to heart and really work on having conscious conversations. That'd be awesome.
Thank you for having me.